Alrighty. Well, we just took prayer requests for those of you joining us online. If you have any, please drop them in the comment section down below. But we are in, of course, Galatians 5. This is week 5 of our series, Holy Living. Holy Living. And as we know, the fruits of the Spirit are virtues that correspond to the vices of the flesh that Paul was going through in Galatians 5. And their response, right? I mean, the vices of the flesh are many, but the virtues of the Spirit seem to be few. But just because there's only 9 of them compared to the 15 or so vices of the flesh, but these are powerful virtues that we have explored so far. And Paul's reasoning was that when the God of the universe takes up residence in the body of a believer, there's got to be some changes, right? There's got to be some changes for people who've experienced a true and lasting relationship with God. Undeniable changes. And so let's look at these changes once again. Let's read our passage just as a point of reference as we dive in tonight. We're going to be talking about, of course, patience. But Paul says, Galatians 5, verse 22, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, and what's the word, church? Patience or long-suffering or forbearance, depending on what translation you're using. They all mean the same thing. Kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no law. And those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. If we live by the Spirit, let us also keep in step with the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another. Now, as I've said almost every single week, and Bob even said it last week, we cannot cultivate the fruits of the Spirit. They are already in the believer because the believer already has the Spirit in them, living inside you. These virtues are not from your flesh. They're not from your mind. They're from the mind of God. They already indwell the believers, and they especially are evident in the believer's life, as Paul says, when you keep in step with the Spirit. And I keep coming back to the analogy. It's like the Spirit is our dance partner, right? And he is guiding us, and let him be the lead as we go through this life. They don't need to be worked on. They just need to be a little bit discovered. And sometimes the Spirit's prompting is not what we want to do, right? Right? The flesh inside of us war against the Spirit, and we don't want to always do what the Spirit wants us to do. In week 2, we tackled how the attribute, really the fruit of the Spirit, is love. And the other 8 virtues actually stem from love. And that love is that agape love. It's that kind of self-giving love. And so without love, there's no joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. It is the, without a doubt, a first among equals. In week 3, we tackled joy, that charis. We learned that aside from love, Paul will talk about joy more than any other New Testament writer, right? If you're going to talk to Paul, he's going to talk to most likely either about love, without a doubt, but then he's going to talk about joy. And joy cannot exist without grace, right? Joy is the response of those who've experienced grace. Anyone who's experienced God's unmerited aid, unmerited assistance, knows about the kind of joy that transcends our circumstances. Why can we have maybe a bad week, like the poor Dennis this week, and many of you who are dealing with illnesses, and why can we have still that peace in the midst of our sorrows? Because we've experienced God's grace, haven't we? God's grace is greater than anything that we've ever experienced. It's why the songwriter said it was not just grace, it was what? Amazing grace. The believer has joy and can rejoice precisely because they do not have to earn their way into God's good graces. God's good graces are freely offered, and this truth in turn makes our heart glad. Now last week I keep saying Paul. Bob was kind enough to tackle the topic of peace. And as he eloquently pointed out, no Jesus, there's no peace, N-O. But no Jesus, K-N-O-W, no Jesus, no peace. Our peace, or what can be thought of as the absence of internal conflict, is directly contingent on who we know, K-N-O-W. Knowing Jesus is knowing the true meaning of peace. When we lack peace, it's often the result of a lack of scriptural contemplation. There are many Christians today who do not experience peace simply because they don't know their Bibles. Thus, to have peace in our life, we must claim the promises in the Bible. We must direct our minds to scriptural principles, at what Bob called positive thinking, and we must meditate daily on God's word, or as he told us last week, I love this, take 2 Psalms and call me in the morning. I'm going to remember that for as long as I live. Now today we're going to tackle something that I lack almost daily. Listen, I struggle with all the fruits of the Spirit, right? Because I'm a fleshly man. I'm not perfect. And I know that's a shocker to many of you. But out of all the ones I think I struggle with most, it's patience. I am not a patient person. In fact, I talked briefly about this last week, but we're in the process of hopefully buying a house, trying to figure out, and thank you, Miss Mary, she even gave me a realtor, and we're talking and trying to figure out this market, and it's kind of become pretty clear to us that it's probably best maybe to wait. It's a seller's market, not a buyer's market, and I refuse to pay an emotional premium. In fact, we talked to a realtor today, and or yesterday, and he said to us, he said he helped a couple get a house, or was trying to help a couple get a house, and they were paying $50,000 above the asking price, and the realtor on the other line said, "We'll call you back," rather than take it. And I said, "No, thank you. I'm ready to go," right? But my wife is a far more patient one, and she, between the realtor we're talking with and now, it seems like we just need to put the brakes on just a little bit. And I'm not one who likes to wait. I'm ready to go. If I have an idea, I am ready to go. And I cannot recount the number of times, often from my own mother, who would tell me daily growing up, all good things come to those who what? Wait. I hated that saying. My mother told me that just as much as her other catchphrase which was, "You'll be all right." Every time I complained about something, my mom would say, "You'll be all right." And we almost put it on her tombstone. That was a big joke. My mother, and in quotations, "You'll be all right." But aside from her telling us that, she would tell me often, all good things come to those who wait. And often this doesn't help at all. It doesn't help me one bit. In fact, it had oftentimes the opposite reaction of only spurring me to impulsive action. I don't want to wait. I want to go. Thus, at least for me, whenever I find myself being patient, then there are rare moments when I actually find myself being patient. I know, out of all the virtues in this list, I know whenever I am patient, that is not me. That is the work of the Spirit. Because that has to be the work of a divine creator and somebody who is in control of even me, right? So let's talk about patience real quick. Can we do that? In the Greek New Testament, there are 2 words translated as patience. There are 2 words that you'll find in your New Testament. There are other Greek words, but only in the New Testament that you're going to find what is typically translated as patience. The first is the most common, which is hupomone. Hupomone, excuse me. Man, I wish Mitzi was here. She usually helps me with my pronunciation. I have probably butchered that. But hupomone, man, there we go. And then makrothumia. Now, these are 2 words, and you would think, well, Pastor, what's the difference? Surely there's a nuance there, and maybe there was in the first century. Maybe there's a difference between these 2 words, but if there was, we've kind of lost it. We don't know, and for the most part, how Paul uses it, or how Jesus uses it, or Peter uses this word, there just seem to be close synonyms. So they basically mean the exact same thing. So what does this tell us, though? It means that unlike when we talk about love, like we talked about love, and how many words are there for love? 3. Yeah, 4. Yeah, 3, 4, and in the Greek language. And oftentimes, you guys know that, and pastors do a good job of always pointing that out. There's different kinds of love. But when Paul talks about patience back then, he means the exact same thing we mean by patience today. It's one of the things that really hasn't changed even in 2,000 years. In fact, patience simply means a capacity to accept delay. So patience is the capacity to accept delay without losing one's temper. How many of you have lost your temper simply because you are impatient? Right? Or as one commentator put it, I read today, was patience is waiting with the right attitude. I thought that was pretty good. Waiting with the right attitude. And of course, I think everyone in here has been a parent. And so you all know kids can wait two different ways. There's the wrong way, then there's the right way. In fact, the other morning, my daughter Piper is on spring break, and as you guys know, we take off Mondays because weekends are just so busy for us. So we take off Mondays, and we were going to go to Longwood Gardens, and had a fantastic time. If you don't know, have you been in Longwood Gardens, Kennett Square, Pennsylvania? Less than an hour away. You can get there. It's fantastic. Anyways, so we were going to go in the morning, and so we all got up, we got going, and I'm making myself breakfast, my wife is making the lunches. We're all kind of busy. And my daughter asked me, she's like, Daddy, I want bagels and cream cheese. And she loves bagels and cream cheese, which we had. I said, yeah, baby, give me a second. I'm making breakfast, doing busy, whatever. And she sat at the Christian table behind me, and I could feel her eyes on the back of my head, waiting for a pause in what I did. And when I stopped doing something, I was thinking, and she's like, Daddy, I'm waiting. And I said, baby, you're going to be waiting a lot longer. So we all know the difference, don't we? Now, she was waiting. She didn't really have a choice, but she was waiting, but she wasn't waiting the right way. So when the Bible speaks about being patient, it's about having waiting with the right attitude or the right way. In fact, our second word for Greek word for patience here, makrothumia, is actually a combination of two Greek words, makros and wrath, or thumos. It's a combination of the two. And it literally translated is lingering wrath. Or, now it sounds pretty like, woo, that sounds scary, but we get our English word long-suffering from makrothumia. Now, why do I bring this up? It's because no matter how you cut it, no matter which way you slice the pie that is patience, patience is a word that literally designates the mental state of a person in a prolonged and unpleasant situation that they successfully endure without breaching some moral standard. That's a very long and wordy definition to simply say they wait without complaining. In other words, a patient person will not fly off the handle, they will not break under pressure, or they will not lose their temper. Their minds are fortified for endurance. Now, patience, as we're going to see tonight, patience is the answer needed to those who provoke us. See, what are situations in which we need to be patient? Oftentimes, there's two scenarios. There's provocation, right? And then there's subjection. There's provocation from people around us. How many of you have somebody in your life that consistently, quote unquote, tries your patience? And then there are just impersonal powers, or people, not even people, maybe just forces that also try your patience. You can't blame them. That's just how our world works, right? There's two ways here. There's this idea of someone who provokes us, and then there's this idea of being perseverant in difficult circumstances. Provocation, often due to difficult people, will disrupt the heart and sharpen the tongue without patience cooling its temper. How many of you have been so impatient with somebody because they've been difficult that your heart starts to palpitate, right? Your blood pressure spikes. And if you're like me, maybe you are cursed or blessed, depending on how you look at it, with a quick wit, quick tongue, sharp tongue, and you lash out, right? Or you're in an argument with somebody, and you just know they're wrong. And you're going to prove it by interrupting them. You can't even wait for them to stop talking. You're going to cut them off at the pass. Right? You're going to parachute in, like in Vietnam, get in there, And you're just going to win it. Win the war by yourself with your words and your wit. See, this is what happens to us when we're impatient. Perseverance, though, this idea of outward circumstances, maybe not from an individual, but just the way life is, are nothing more than a theory without someone giving strength to the resolve. If you want to persevere, say, we can't blame anybody for, no matter what Fox News or CNN tell you, can't blame anybody for COVID. Be careful down that road. We can't blame for something like a worldwide pandemic on one people or people group. All we can do is persevere, get to the end, to the point to where hopefully someday we can come to church without masks. Right? We've already now seen, Lord willing, it'll stay this way. You can come to church without roping off the pews. And there's vaccine distribution. There's some good things coming. And this idea that, listen, at the beginning of the pandemic, it was really hard, wasn't it, to not lose heart because we didn't know. Who has ever lived through a pandemic? No one, right? That's alive, at least. And so we didn't know what to expect, but there was a hope, a glimmer that maybe there's a vaccine or maybe it's not as bad. And you kind of went through this line. You went through this emotional roller coaster and you, quote unquote, persevered because you really didn't have a choice, but you were patient. You were hoping that something will change your circumstances. And in fact, whenever we interact with a difficult person or come to a troubling scenario, we have a choice. We can be either impatient, and often that manifests in anger, which we did see a lot, didn't we, during the COVID pandemic? We still do. Or we can allow patience, as Paul says, to have her perfect work in you. And patience, rather than war. See, if you're impatient, it leads to strife, as Paul actually talked about later in Galatians 5, and we're going to talk about here in James chapter 5 here in a second. But being impatient always leads to conflict. But being patient always leads to peace. Why do you think Paul, when he was writing the virtues of the Spirit, he went love, joy, peace, then patience? Because they're connected. There's a close correlation. And when you allow patience to have a perfect work, he says, James chapter 1, verse 4 and 5, patience has her perfect work in you that he might or she might mature and grow you. Some people don't want to grow, right? How many of you have met somebody who is still, in some way, even though maybe they're in their 50s or 60s, there's still a part of them that is immature? That though they are, by all outward metrics, maybe even a senior citizen, there is still a part of them that's immature. See, tonight, the point I'm trying to make is that patience is like a trainer, as James talks about. She's like a trainer trying to beef us up for the challenges that lie ahead. Patience tries to grow us. And a telltale sign of immaturity is impatience. Someone who come to me and say, I want it now. Many times I've had conversations with people, and I love people. My life is people. But one thing I learned early in ministry is that people who, rather than request your time or want to get together or try to work with your schedule, there's two types of people, right? There's those people who try to work with your schedule, and then there's those other people who demand your time. You're a pastor. I'm going to be at your office at this time. There's an immaturity for that person that I could never address. And then there's a maturity for the other person. There's someone who understands that I'm a human being. I maybe have a schedule. See, being impatient, for me at least, and especially for the writers of the New Testament, is a telltale sign of immaturity. So let's talk about what James. So here we're going to why does Paul talk about this long-suffering, forbearance, patience, endurance? Why does he talk about this? Well, he's talking from things that is already in the Scriptures. And James actually does a fantastic job of explaining what does the New Testament mean when they specifically talk about patience. So James 5. James 5 is where we're going to be just briefly tonight. James 5. Verse 7. He says, "Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until it receives both the early and late rains. You also be patient." So did you see that? Within the course of 3 verses, or not even 3 verses, 2 in your Bible, but really 3 sentences, he says, be patient, be patient, be patient. Anytime, again, this is just Bible study 101. Anytime the Bible repeats itself, that quickly take notice. They never repeat themselves just because they want to repeat themselves. It's for a reason. He says it's for emphasis. Hey, Christian, be patient. Oh, you didn't hear me the first time? Hey, Christian, be patient. Oh, now you're listening. Hey, Christian, be patient. Verse 8, you also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is what? At hand. Do not grumble. Remember we talked about? What does impatience lead to? Argument, conflict, war. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. So the Lord is at hand, and now the judge is standing at the Lord. Verse 10, as an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and what, church? Merciful. So we know the character of God, do we not? Isn't God good? Amen? Doesn't God love you? Yes. He wants the best for you, not what you want, but he still wants the best for you. He is a good God. He is a good Father, and he is compassionate. As James says, he is merciful. But he's also judge, and he's also the Lord at hand. And so James has some advice for those of us who would be patient and for those of us who would not be patient. Let's talk first about the people who are, as we say, impatient. James has 2 points about patience. A lack of patience leads to a lack of what, church? Peace. How many of you have ever driven on 95 in Baltimore during rush hour? How many of you have ever been stuck in traffic? How many of you have just had to get somewhere and all of a sudden you get behind the one person who decides to go the speed limit? There is a lack of peace in that moment, isn't there? You are impatient to get where you need to go, and there is no peace in your heart in that moment, right? A lack of patience leads to a lack of peace. James seems to imply that difficult situations are the breeding grounds for contention. Why do you think we've had such heartache? I mean, we just had the shooting in Colorado, shooting in Atlanta, siege of the Capitol on January 6th, the riots, the BLM riots throughout the country in the spring and fall. Why is that? Because our country was in severe trouble. And in trouble breeds contention. And we start to fight. When peace or security is taken from us, we get angry and we get combative. We get up our fists and we want to point fingers and blame. Especially think about the book of James was written to a group of believers who were not unlike us, were under severe hardship. Not with the pandemic. It's not a stretch to surmise that the worry and pressure they experienced was right from religious persecution. It would have been enough. This religious persecution would have been enough to heighten tensions within the church community. You would have had people coming to church who weren't necessarily scared of a virus. They were scared to lose their life because they came to church. Can you imagine just for a moment the kind of pressure believers would have been under coming to church on Sunday morning? And that lack of peace breeds contention. This stress would have predisposed believers to discord and to grumbling, making an already bad situation worse. Does complaining ever make a bad situation better? This is one thing I trying to teach my daughters, my children, is like when they are hot, stop saying it's hot. It doesn't help anybody. We're all hot too, right? Keep it to yourself. Complaining about a bad situation doesn't make it better. It always makes it worse. That's why we must be patient, especially with my daughter. It's like, I still remember getting in the car and there was like the peak heat last summer, and she's like, Daddy, I'm hot, right? We were out bicycling and doing stuff outside, and the truck air, I have great air in my truck. One of the best features of my truck is, hey, it's missing some hubcaps, it's scratched, it's rusted, but it has good air. But it does take some time to get going. And I had to tell Piper, just give it a second. It's going to get there, and then you're going to be cold. Be, what's the word? Patient. Stop complaining. And a breakdown of patience is always preceded by a breakdown of camaraderie. A breakdown of patience is always preceded or followed by a breakdown of camaraderie or fellowship. Infighting may have many initial causes, but the commonality between all arguments is the lack of forbearing one another in love. In other words, what is Paul used that phrase in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 1 through 3. What does it mean to forbear one another in love? What does that mean in the common vernacular? It means to give each other the benefit of the doubt. That, hey, sometimes we make mistakes, don't we? And you know you're an imperfect being, and you surely know your brothers or sisters are imperfect too. But you're still going to give them the benefit of the doubt. You're going to forbear, be patient, endure maybe their shortcomings because what? You love them. The believer is to wait for the coming of the Lord in the same manner. James tells us to wait for the coming of the Lord the same manner, the way the farmer waits for both the early and the later rains. They are to control their tongues and so avoid squabbling, for the Eternal One will judge every word spoken. He's standing at the door. I'll never forget when I was in class in high school. One of the kids, teacher went out from the room, and one of the kids was saying something. I don't remember what it is, but his back was to the door, and it was to us. And he was saying something about the teacher, and the teacher just walked in the door. And was just standing there. And he got in so much trouble, and I wish I could remember. But this is the idea that James is saying, look, we're not at the beginning of God's redemptive work. We're at the very end. The end is coming. The eternal end is coming. And the judge is standing at the door. And he, as James tells us in Matthew 12:36, you're going to have to give an account of everything you said. Every misspoken word and everything you said to your brothers and sisters that wasn't in love. And so he says, look, if you want to avoid that judgment, if you want to avoid the teacher standing at the door, you need to be patient. You need to be forbearing and enduring one another in love. Pretty good advice. But then he says, okay, if you're saying to yourself, okay, Pastor, I want to be patient. I know I'm an impatient person. Tell me about being patient. So James talks about a lot of patience leads to a lot of praise. A lack of it leads to a lack of peace, but a lot of patience leads to a lot of praise. And he gives two examples. James talks about the prophets. That's a pretty big umbrella. The prophets, right? Just go to the Old Testament. All of them were patient. So who might he be talking about? Despite overwhelming difficulty, the prophets of old steadfastly endured difficult hardships. That's an understatement tonight. I want you to think about somebody like Elisha, who thought he was alone. Remember? He was on the run for his life. In 1 Kings chapter 19, he was in a mountain, and God says, I got to talk to you. And he comes, there's a earthquake and a fire, and then there's a whirlwind, and God is not in any of them. And he comes to Elisha in a what? A still small voice, right? There is peace, hear me, peace and praise in the presence of God always. But we oftentimes overlook at the very end of that passage, right after that whole scene, God reminds Elisha, listen, you're not alone. You may feel like you're alone, but there are still 7,000 who've not bent the knee. And Elisha endured, did he not? Think of Daniel. We talked about Daniel. I mean, for how long did that take us? That was like 15, 16, I felt it was forever. Yeah, it was a long time. We took our time getting through that book. But think about Daniel in the lion's den. And he throws down there because he's following God, and he very likely probably thought his life was done, but did he give up? Did he bend the knee to Nebuchadnezzar? No. He endured. Think of Jeremiah the prophet. You know what his moniker is in the Old Testament? The weeping prophet. The man had a hard life. He was there at the very end to see his nation break. Very end. The man was thrown into a mud pit. People had, the decrees were, other prophets were prophesying about that he has to die. But nowhere do we see Jeremiah, though he wept a lot and had an awful time about it, give up. And then James says, remember Job. That's all you need to say. What an example of patience. Despite overwhelming loss and overwhelming suffering, Job refused to curse God time and time again. Now, he had to learn something. He wasn't perfect, especially when you get into the other half of the book. There's some commentary on questioning God, that though Job never cursed God, he did question God, and even that was a little bit of a breach. We can talk about Job another day. But never did Job curse God, did he? He remained faithful. He was patient. Though many of these never experienced the blessedness in life, today we, like James, call people like Job and prophets blessed. Don't you want to be like Jeremiah? Even though he had a hard life. Daniel, Elisha, don't you want to be like Job? Who God, though he didn't he go through so much heartache? But God added to him that much more at the end of his life. Isn't that not a metaphor for our own life? That we can have here today an awfulness. Maybe our entire life is struggle after struggle after struggle, but we have put our faith and we are enduring and we have been patient. And then in the end, we get to go to heaven. We get to have a relationship. Our life is added 10, not just double or quadruple, 10, 100-fold than whatever we had here. Job is that example. And we look at these people, Job, Daniel, Elisha, and these are examples that spur us on. They give us cause to be patient, to endure, to persevere. So what's the takeaway? What's the takeaway? What sustained Job's patience in the face of loss? What fueled Daniel's resolve as he was in the lion's den? What keeps the farmer from despair as he waits for his crops to grow? What fortifies the believer's heart as they wait for their deliverance from persecution? A known end sustains a lasting patience. A known end sustains a lasting patience. when I do, in the rare moments, not too rare anymore, but I will say the rare moments where my daughter is patient, it is often because I have helped her in being patient. I will tell her, baby, I know you want this thing. When the timer goes off, you will get that thing. But right now, the answer is no. So she knows there's a time limit. She knows she doesn't have to be patient forever. There is an end coming. And in the end, Daddy promised I would get a cookie. And anytime that she needs to be patient, that is always helpful. We're not unlike children, aren't we? Church, do we not know our end? Don't we know where we're going? We might not know, okay, we're at A, and we know Z. We may not know everything in between, but we know the end. And knowing the end makes our patience manageable. It makes it lasting. Patience is a fruit of the Spirit that teaches us that whatever the world may say, this is not the end. I've not been on this earth long, not had many presidents in my lifetime, but one thing I learned quick is that every presidential election, they say, this is the most important presidential election of our age. And my goodness, if your candidate loses, it's the end. Despair. They're going to come in and rip your Bibles out of your hand. Come on, I know you all have heard it. And on the back of my head, I think, this is not the end. No matter what Fox News or CNN or what anyone says, this is not the end. And I can be patient and not go to conflict, not go to anarchy, not go to despair, but I can be patient because I know who is not only the Alpha, but he is also the Omega. A better day is coming. A better world is coming. And while this world may be unbearable for you at the moment, it has an end. There is a timer for our world. It is not forever. This is a finite world, but it will give way to an infinite world someday. A perfect world someday. Job can be steadfast despite his bad, what I call in parentheses, of course, bad luck, because he knew who was ultimately in control. Daniel can face the ravenous open maw of lions in a cold and dark pit because he knew, even if it was his end of his life, it was not the end of his existence. The farmer can plant a seed and watch as the early and the latter rains fall and know that a harvest day is coming. He's been doing this long enough. And the Christian who patiently endures and patiently perseveres through difficulty knows that with the coming of the Lord comes an end of their patience. There's coming a day when you do not have to be patient anymore. Come on, church. That's good. Amen. Especially for someone who doesn't like to be patient. God will right every wrong. He will make all things new. No matter how bad it gets, there is always a better day coming. Keeping the end in mind keeps our patience secure. And while patience is never fun, its rewards are great. Or as one philosopher put it, patience is bitter, but its fruit is sweet. Amen. Father, I love you. I thank you for tonight. Lord, you know more than anybody else in this room how much I need to be patient. And so, Lord, I would ask you that you would teach me your ways. There's always that old saying that you never should ask for patience. But Lord, so often I find myself in situations where I lack patience. Father, I pray that you would help me be someone who is always looking at the end game. That I know where I'm going. I know the end of this world. It's not forever. That God, you're going to be there. I'm going to be there with you. Lord, and no matter how bad my life may get, this is not the end. I pray that you would help our hearts to always look for your coming, not with dread, but with excitement. Lord, I want everybody who comes to Grace Point to look to the heavens every day and say, even now, Lord, come. Lord, I want you to come. Lord, our world is really so broken. Only you can fix it. And God, I just pray that you would help us, Lord, though, as you tarry, as you appear to us to wait, that we would be patient. I love you, my God, and I thank you. And all God's people said, Amen.